And I believe, oh yes, there is Mr. Marin. If you would like to introduce any information you have around that.
Yep. Yeah, this is so you have balances here for class of 21 and class of 24. And once you approve it, we'll work with those officers to get their funds to them.
So if there are any questions, otherwise I'd accept a motion to disperse the fund balances.
Yeah, we make a motion to disperse the fund balances as noted in this memo.
Second.
Thank you. We have to do a roll call vote. So, Mr. Hopcroft?
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom?
You may have lost her. I don't see her.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wait. No, she's still there.
Oh, look, there she is.
Ms. Bergstrom, I didn't hear. Oh, no.
I got kicked out.
Oh, no.
I assume it was to accept the consent agenda as presented.
Yes.
Then yes.
Thank you. Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
And the chair votes aye. The vote is unanimous. And I'll just note that Mr. Matthews could not join us this afternoon. Let us see. Okay, next item is the consideration of, well, a report, update, and action item around the town, authorizing the town to proceed on the Mystic School HVAC project. And I would just say, excuse me. At the June 11th meeting, 2024 school committee meeting, Mr. Nixon had updated the committee on recent developments for the proposed Mystic Building HVAC project. So this is the first time that school committee has discussed this topic in depth since early winter this year. And we, let me just see. And this project is coming before the select board as it's been proposed to use the remaining ARPA funding to mitigate and avert potential failure of the HVAC system at the Mystic building. As we know, heating to the second floor annex portion of the Mystic building has been challenging due to control during the winter, and steam pipe ruptures have necessitated DPW oversight and resources to manage heat across the building for students and staff. However, there's also the question of what the future of this building is coming out of a coming update to the 10-year facilities master plan. Dr. Hackett and school committee members some school committee members, Mr. Nixon and I have subsequently met with Weston and with the Weston and Sampson engineer, Scott Enriquez, town manager, Beth Rudolph, select board chair, Michelle Pryor, and select board vice chair, John Fallon, among others, to understand the scope of this project better. And Mr. Nixon can provide an update on this, assuming all is okay with his technology.
Mr. Nixon, are you able to hear us?
Maybe he's rebooting. Pardon me, just.
He's reconnecting to audio. Okay, where he is. Mr. Nixon, can you hear us?
Yeah, I got kicked out, but I just got back in.
All right.
So I just given a brief update of since your update to school committee last week, and then just a little bit of background on the issue at the with the heat at the Mystic Building, and that we had just met with the Weston and Sampson engineer, and I was about to turn it over to you to talk further about that.
And then I went away.
Yes.
Okay, so let me just maybe give an elevator speech. So I don't know if everybody's had the opportunity to review some of the documents that Frank put in the shared folder this morning. So when this project was last discussed publicly, well, first of all, you guys will remember Nick, John Fallon, Pete Lawson came to talk to us at a school committee meeting at Winchester High School back in I think it was December, early January maybe. There was a follow-up meeting at the select board table on January 8th. And at that meeting is when the select board voted to encumber put $150,000 of ARPA towards design and engineering towards what they envisioned as a heating replacement at Mystic. And that was January 8th. And we will all remember at the time, we were concerned about whether or not anything could really be done this summer because that's just such a short runway. And so at that meeting, it was agreed that although we all understand and presume that any major heating system work would be summer work, the hope was that it would be done by the summer of 24. If it could not be, it would have to be done in the summer of 25. And then Mr. Lawson said, if we can't get it done in the summer of 24, I'm going to move forward with a supplemental heating project, some sort of a small project, so we get some supplemental heat for those cold spaces at the top of the building, back of the hill. So that's where it was left. They didn't know anything until I put that memo together for you guys back initially on May 28th when we understood something was happening on Mystic. We did understand, I think back in March, management reached out to Dr. Hackett just to let him know that the preliminary read from the engineers would be that a total system replacement at Mystic would be north of $4 or $5 million. So it sort of hit the brakes on that because there isn't that kind of money. My sense is that we were right up against the municipal elections and town meeting and all the work that goes along with that. So that I think much more recently they've tried to get this going again and have essentially reached out to Weston and Sampson and said, as I think you'll understand from their report that Beth Rudolph shared a couple of weeks ago, what can you do for $900,000? So that was really the purpose of our meeting yesterday with the engineers, is to go through the report. Specifically because if you read the report, it talks a lot about this idea of isolating the 1923 steam piping at Mystic, but that only accounts for about half the building. And ironically, the spaces that Nick is struggling with that are so cold are in the addition from 1950. They don't rely on 101-year-old steam piping. So we wanted to just understand straight from the horse's mouth, if you will, what was the goal of this exercise, this schematic package that's just been shared with all of us recently, and what's not. So the engineer was very helpful. He was pretty clear, and he said it was not his sort of mandate to come up with a project that was going to bring supplemental heat to those colder spaces. His priority, his directive, was to make the system more resilient, as he put it, more reliable, because there are so many leaks that DPW is struggling with in the 1923 piping. And so they seek to basically isolate all that and go in with a new split VRF system with air handlers that will provide both heating and cooling in those spaces, which is great for them. But again, not sort of physically, we're not providing any equipment for those upper level spaces at the back that are cold. We talked a lot about, well, then what is the consequence in isolating the system? Are they going to get more heat? And is it going to be better? Is it going to be better able to be controlled? The engineer was not comfortable going out on that limb, but certainly expressed a willingness to work with the town and see what could be done to both increase the heat back there and to make it more controllable, if you will. I think I'm representing that accurately. I'd ask Karen or Frank to weigh in if I'm not. He was a really good engineer, and he was very black and white about what he was assigned to do. And there is some real value, I think, in his approach to isolate steam pipes that are 101 years old that are failing. I don't think anybody disputes that. I mean, that's actually a good idea. It's not a bad idea. There are other elements, though, in his proposal that add some real cost and complexity. Like, instead of just upsizing the transformer on the pole, they've suggested buried service and a pad mounted transformer. That adds cost to the project. And transformers are terribly difficult to get right now. They are holding up all sorts of private projects across Massachusetts. And even school projects are being delayed because of the lack of availability. And even the engineer told us he apparently is not living in his house. He's waiting on a transformer for his own house. I don't know who he's living with right now. So he has acknowledged that that could be a problem. But again, he's not in the business of delivering transformers. So, there's some risk in this, to this idea of what this all comes around to is obviously nothing's happening right now, summer of 24. What's news to me is that there's this urgency to do something now, like this fall. I thought because we weren't doing it this summer, it would by necessity be a summer 25 project, and we would do something small in the interim to give heat up to Mystic. There seems to be now a pivot. So management now feels strongly they want to move forward with this, which is why they want us to talk about it and show some support. So that they're bidding at like in August or September. They could be starting to work in maybe abatement in October or November. But if you really look at how the schedule goes, everybody agrees the project might not be complete by the time we get into the heating season. DPW says that's okay because you still have the system you have, which is true. It's not great, but it's not like we're turning off heat in the building. And so there's just a strong push to get moving on this project. But the engineer did acknowledge it's very, very conceptual right now. So to the detailed questions I was asking about, why are we doing ceiling cassettes? We could do wall-mounted air handlers and minimize the amount of abatement, maybe kick fewer people out of the building. We talked about the fact that we have a tenant plus rec. He was very quick to say it's just very conceptual. There may be some spaces where wall-mounted air handlers make sense. And then the other interesting thing to me is in his proposal, he's suggesting that they isolate all the piping in the part of the building that faces Main Street when you face the Kids Corner entrance on the left. That's not built in 1923. That was built in 1950. And if you look carefully on his drawings, there's even a note that that's the addition. But that's in his scope. So I just couldn't understand why would we kick people out, abate the space, rip out piping that went in 1950, not 1923? And the answer that I thought I heard Frank and Karen was, well, that space is so close to the boiler, kind of makes sense to do it. But, he stopped short of saying you really have to. I feel like the group that met yesterday, there was this understanding that there may be some fat that could be cut out of this, which obviously means less ARPA being spent on this, more ARPA available for something else. I just come at it from the point of view, to the extent the scope is reduced to only what's necessary. We're impacting fewer people in the building. Fewer people need to leave the building. There's less abatement, and then there's less spaces we're actually mucking with. And that's just going to be important because families rely on, that building for childcare regardless of who they write the check to. The last thing I will say quickly is I did actually personally meet with Andrew at Kids Corner about an hour ago. Just wanted to be sure, because it was represented in our meeting, that Rec and Kids Corner have a good working relationship and they'll work together to come up with a shared plan. If they need to move programming into the auditorium to make other spaces available, they're happy to do it. And I did share with Andrew that if this project gets going in the fall, this could mean they lose 1 or 2 classrooms at a time for, it could be 2 to 3 days or a week for abatement. And then when that's done, then you still have to actually do the work. And there may be a period in between where they can get back into the classroom. But when the work starts, they may lose 1 or 2 classrooms for a month. And his response was essentially, we'll do what we need to do. We want to be, good tenants. If we're losing more than 2 classrooms, that's going to be a problem because, he's kind of scratching his head. Where would they go? He wants to be a good partner. Absolutely wants to be in the loop and kind of understand what's going on here. So I think our closing remarks to both Michelle Pryor and Beth Rudolph yesterday was, if it's really important that this project go in the fall, you need to communicate, to not just Nick and Andrew, but all those families. There needs to be a message about what we're doing and why, because I'm expecting there will be some disruptions, and families may not be happy. But if we're going to do it in the fall, there's going to be a consequence for that. Frank was quick to say, look, maybe you could do some work during school breaks. The majority of those, of course, are coming during the heating season. And DPW and management thought that was a good idea. I mean, that's fine. It just, the obvious thing is if you're doing a chunk of the work, like after Thanksgiving, well, then you're in the heating season, and we don't have a new heating system yet, but it's underway. So anyway, that's sort of a mouthful. I mean, just to circle back on how Karen opened the meeting, I just want to clarify, it's not our decision how the board spends ARPA money. What we have to approve is the actual construction. And what they have right now is something that's extremely conceptual. I mean, extremely conceptual. There's a lot more they'll learn as they move forward. Beth Rudolph was in agreement that the motion that we might entertain today would be that the school committee supports management's continued development of a partial heating system replacement at Mystic, that we support continued engineering to a bid set with the potential for construction activity in the fall. And I think we all were very careful to say potential. And I think, Frank, from your point of view, that kind of means as they get to those finish lines in terms of design, that they almost have to come back to us, come back to you, kind of share what they know. Because some of this may change. There may be fewer spaces that are impacted. Maybe more, I hope not. But anyway, that's sort of, I mean, that's a mouthful. This is like information through a fire hose, I mean, for me as well. And now I'm throwing it back to you guys. But yeah, that's kind of where we are. I don't know if Frank or Karen want to add more to it, or Andrew, you were there for that call as well. Did I misrepresent anything?
No, from my perspective, no. I thought that's a good summary of it. I think what's tough is just there isn't a lot of information, hard dates yet. We don't really know quite a few things that would definitely impact us. We just went through moving Lynch to Parkhurst, and that sucked the life out of quite a few people. I know it's not as many people that would be talking about potentially having to try to figure out, but if we are talking about trying to figure out if it cannot be accommodated for, and I think Chris and Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, what I thought I heard Nick say is that if it's one or two classrooms, that if for a period of time, short term, that they could accommodate it within the space. But if it were to be more than that, I don't know that they would be able to. And then the question obviously would be what happens to the kids who are at Winrec and Kids Corner. Just to give you some sense of scale of numbers anyway, for currently right now, there are 172 kids in the Winrec program after school, and there's 130 at Kids Corner. Winrec also runs a pre-K with that has 65 students in it, and then they have another 40 or so that are in different enrichment programs that are offered after school. So
Frank, can you just hit those numbers real quick again?
Sure.
You don't have to label them. Just give me those four numbers again.
Just Winrec 172, Kids Corner 130, pre-K 65, 40 in enrichment programs.
Okay.
And
Yes, you were correct.
No, the reason I'm asking in that meeting yesterday, I did feel like towards the end, it was almost like there began to be some real pressure, to sort of to say yes to this. And at one point, I think it was Beth Rudolph said, I think it was Beth who said there's, 700 to 900 kids rely on this building. And I couldn't resist. I mean, I reacted. I just said 700 to 900, I mean, it was 300 kids in January. So that was frustrating to me. The other thing I just want to say real quick, I see Michelle has her hand raised. Michelle Pryor asked some questions in writing of Pete, I think yesterday morning. And I only saw the responses to that, Frank, when you shared it like a couple hours ago. I got to be honest with you, I'm very disappointed with both literally what those answers are and almost the tone of those answers. One of Michelle Pryor's question is, which rooms exactly need heat? And the answer back is, not sure what you're talking about. All the rooms have heat. I mean, I want to say, give me a break. I mean, the question Michelle Pryor is trying to ask is which rooms are chronically cold and therefore need supplemental heat. So I don't know. I feel sometimes like people are starting to be cute with words and being defensive, and I don't know why that's all happening. It's an old building. Half of it was built 101 years ago. The rest of it was built in 1949 and 1950. A real problem they have is some of the original steam piping is failing. And really a replacement or isolating it as it's being proposed is not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. But it's not sort of explicitly bringing more heat to rec. And that's kind of what I thought we were all in alignment that we needed to do. So I'm puzzled. I'm going to say this last thing. I'm going to shut up. When I saw the responses back to Michelle Pryor, my reaction was it actually makes me want to suggest we do nothing today other than, we talk about it a little bit. And I think maybe we wait for more fulsome answers to the questions that Michelle Pryor wrote yesterday, because I think she asked really fair questions that we and the select board deserve answers to. And she didn't get it. I'm done.
If I could just make, I'm sorry, just one quick correction. The numbers I gave you are based on registrations for next year, not current year.
And I was just going to, so you had asked if for confirmation about what Nick and Andrew or Nick had said in the meeting. And yes, he did say that if it's roughly 2 or 3 classrooms that need to be vacant for a few days, that he and Andrew from Kids Corner were on board with working together to identify spaces within the Mystic building to accommodate those students during those time periods. So, Ms. Bergstrom.
Mr. Nixon, I'd agree with the very last statement that you made that we don't really have enough information to make a decision on this one way or another today. I also reviewed the questions and answers of Michelle had asked, and I found them unsatisfying and non-specific. I thought she asked some very direct questions that should have some easy answers to them. And if we can't even get answers to some of the basic questions, it would be really hard to move forward, I think, on any kind of a motion today. When Mr. Hopcroft and I toured the facility with Ms. Pryor and Mr. Fallon in the fall, Mr. Lawson was pretty clear that for any abatement, everyone would have to be out of the building because of containment of a lot of the asbestos. So I'm really curious about family and child safety in that building, talking about doing something a classroom at a time. And I would certainly not want to have a dangerous situation there for families and kids where we'd have to move everybody out super quickly. And it doesn't escape my notice that if this project were taken more time with, if we decided, first of all, what the future of the Mystic building even is for us in the town, if we could get through the master plan and if we could vacate Parkhurst, there would be a perfectly lovely space for everyone to move into beginning in the next school year, where we wouldn't have to worry about student and family safety. We could take time with the building and manage what we needed to manage theoretically in the short term before we might need it for Morocco.
And I should qualify my remarks from a second ago. They did say in this meeting from 2 days ago that for abatement of hazardous material, then the entire building would have to be vacant. But for mechanical setup, they would just need to have 2 to 3 classrooms at a time vacated. So for that is worth.
And I certainly understand the urgency for that, but this seems kind of like putting almost lipstick on a pig in terms of a solution. Like what, I'm a firm believer in if we're going to do a project, we do it right and we don't do it halfway and we don't just try to do the quick fix that may never lead to the long fix. If there is a long-term future for Mystic, then the town should be thinking about the long-term future of Mystic and not fixing something because $1.5 million is nothing to sneeze at. So I'm curious about Mr. Nixon's question about what other alternative heating and cooling sources we could provide to those spaces were there a failure of heating in those rooms, to get people through to a time where we could actually move people into a better space potentially.
And can I just just to clarify that, Michelle? So I want to be clear. I'm not the one saying you guys should come up with a supplemental approach. That literally came from DPW. I just watched
Right.
it on webcam in January. Literally, so many times, privately and publicly to us, the committee, it has been said this needs to be summer work, and if it could not be summer 24, it would have to be summer 25. But because of concern about the reliability of heat and how cold some of those spaces are, that if we weren't going to get it done this summer, Pete Lawson said he was going to develop a supplemental heat project and get pricing, so to be sure that the folks at rec at the top, at the back,
Right.
would be comfortable. He said he was going to do that if the big project did not happen in the summer. And I asked him that question at the meeting yesterday. I was like, what happened? Right. Where do we stand on this? And I'm not sure I really got a clear answer other than, well, we just feel like, we want to move on this now. Well, the engineer had acknowledged 3 or 4 times the transformer itself, because it's such a critical path item. You might get the whole project done, and you're sitting on your hands in January or February waiting for a transformer that's not coming in until March anyway. Anyway, sorry, Tom.
That's okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Building on Ms. Bergstrom and Mr. Nixon, we're sort of balancing a lot of risks here, and more information would be helpful. I'm a little bit nervous about more information on this singular path we're on. I feel like it needs a broader bit of more information. When I think about this, and I think about what our shared interests are as a school committee, but also with the select board and the overall community, we clearly have interest in ensuring that we maintain a comfortable and reliable temperature so we can operate the school with our tenants and open rec and kids corner. So that's obviously on everyone's mind. How do we do that? I think there's also a shared interest in investing town resources, whether it's DPW or our town financial resources efficiently for the long term. And so it leads me to a lot of questions, and I guess I'm unclear on a lot of things. So for starting, it's not clear which problems we're trying to solve. I think there's a number that I can deduce here. I think some of them lead to different directional outputs. I think we're trying to solve where to spend ARPA funds before they expire, because there's talk as I watched the select board about, well, if we don't do it here, we'll do it over at maybe the library or maybe some other project. But it seems like that might be driving some of the December deadline, is we have to rush because we need to commit this money really quickly. Another problem that we're trying to solve is to increase the resilience of the system and reduce DPW service calls and time spent, to keep the system operating. And to that, I'd be curious that we could quantify them, because that's a real cost, and that might offset the expense. Does it equate to a full-time employee that doesn't need to be hired in the future? How big of an expense is that? The big problem, of course, is how do we ensure when rec and kids corner have adequate heat and cooling, and is that in the right places? I heard Mr. Nixon, as you said, and Ms. Bergstrom, as we toured, we're talking about solution in one area to maybe a problem in another area. It hasn't been stated, but I get that maybe solving the pollution, the problem in the area where the problem is biggest in terms of leaks, maybe that creates more pressure to allow more heat in the other part of the building, but no one has actually said that. It certainly addresses the problem of DPW resources because they're not plugging holes all the time. But I don't have clarity kind of around that. And then it hasn't been mentioned, but Ms. Bergstrom sort of alluded to, how do we move forward with a more efficient, predictable, cost-effective, and sustainable building for the long term? Having that there. So that there's this time urgency, I feel like, around the ARPA deadline rather than the heating season, which is perplexing to me. It sounds like there isn't a scenario where we have a new system in there before the heating season begins. And if that's the case, what's our contingency for the system failing in December or January before we have this? And whatever that is, and by the way, if you go over to Walgreens, they have like HVAC units sitting in their place, the temporary rented from Hertz. So there are temporary solutions, but what is our plan for a December failure? And could that plan, since it may be February, March, April, depending on the transformer, so that be our backup plan so that this could push out to the year ahead? A few other points, so give me just a moment or two here. The school building master facilities plan obviously isn't going to be done before these decisions get made, but it strikes me that we could apply some logic and say there's probably a few different scenarios. One is that we invest in keeping our building, and we're going to just replace every system in it, and it's going to be expensive and it's going to be a long haul over time, and we that's one option. Another is we demo the building, maybe build something else or whatever. Another is we divest the property. But if we think about just some of the likely scenarios, and by the way, the timing on the facilities master plan, I would hope that we have some idea by December, even if we're not done with it, but some idea of whether we're thinking of, if we want to invest in the building long term or demolish it or whatever. But it then leads towards a lens through which we can evaluate the different scenarios. If we know that we're likely to get rid of the building in a relatively short term, and we're going to do a short term solution in there, then I would say, how do we reduce the costs? And I heard them say that 2/3 of the costs are abatement and other factors. So Mr. Nixon had talked about hanging things on the wall instead of messing with the asbestos in the ceiling. Are there things we can do to drive the costs down if we're really just putting a Band-Aid on the building? Or we're thinking of keeping the building. Is this system one that's expandable? Could this be the core of our future system that over time we can add on new zones and new sections to it? That wasn't really addressed in there. With the timelines, talking early spring and maybe sliding out later, the relocation question and Parkhurst, I think as Ms. Bergstrom said, would 3 months really make a difference? Could we push this into the summer season when we have a facility for the kids, when we, would that work? And I think, so I think that's most of my questions. So at the end of the day, my top concern is that we maintain a comfortable and reliable place for our students. I'm on the second part about investing our resources well. I want to be a good, citizen, good, committee neighbor to our other committees, and not make DPW do lots of work they don't need to be doing and things like that. But I'm also aware that our finances in town are a bit of a zero-sum game, and if we overspend on one thing, there may be another priority come down the road that we then can't afford. And so, anyway, I'm supportive of having a plan and doing something. I'm nervous about saying, yes, let's just move forward on this particular solution, because I'm not really sure what the solution is, which of the things and how much of which it's solving, and whether it's short or long term. There's just a lot of assumptions I'm making in there. So I'll stop there for now.
Can I just say real quick, I know Michelle has her hand up. I have to jump off the computer and jump on with my phone because I got to get in the car. So I have some additional thoughts I'm happy to share after I connect. So I just have to, I got to disconnect from this and connect by phone. That's all.
Thank you. And I would just comment that just based on the information that we have from the report and then from the meeting the other day, I am, as Mr. Hopcroft had said, I'm a little puzzled. I mean, if we fix if the problem with the steam pipe leaks, ruptures, is fixed in the original portion of the building, then does that truly impact the second floor annex and get them adequate heat? I find that a little bit of a mystery at this particular point. And then, yeah. So, Ms. Bergstrom.
So I realize that our job is not to direct or tell the select board how to spend ARPA any more than it would be the select board's role to tell us how to spend ESSER. But I will suggest that just like our budget, the town budget has funds that are fungible. So I don't think our calculus on this should be worried about whether the select board can spend their ARPA by December. I would imagine if they don't choose to spend ARPA on this, that there's other expenditures that they have in their budget through the stabilization fund, through the building stabilization fund, that they could just shift projects from one account to another. So I don't think in our consideration, not should we only tell them not to spend ARPA, but we shouldn't be worried about their deadline with ARPA. We should be worried about whether we have enough information to ask them to move forward on this, and whether this is, since this building is still under our control right now, whether this is the kind of project that we foresee being helpful and valuable in the long term for this building. And we should also understand what school committee's long-term plan is for this building. So, I would suggest that we do have the master planning process coming up. And if we wanted to answer that question more thoroughly, we could prioritize the Mystic building in our master planning process and begin with that building and perhaps have some information to share so that if we slowed this process down a little bit, we might have a better understanding of what kind of investment is a good long-term investment for the town and the schools. Since it's our building, any money that's spent on this building is going to be viewed as money spent on a school building, even though it is occupied by WinRec and Kids Corner. So we are still the stewards of this building. So we need to think about how all of those things fit together. And I'd also suggest that it may have been premature today, but the best way to get at that may be to get more information, to get more master planning information on this building, and then schedule a joint meeting with the select board so we can all sit down and have these discussions together. So we're not continuing a back and forth. It's sometimes it's great for us to have our own independent conversations where we can think things through that apply just to our boards. But when we have overlapping concerns like this, sometimes it just turns into a game of telephone too. I appreciate all the work that Karen and Chris have done working with the town on this today. But as I mentioned, Tom and I began this work with Mr. Fallon and Ms. Pryor, and I feel like we're bouncing around in groups of two instead of getting together and just having a larger discussion on this. So I'll stop.
Can I just say that I totally agree on the ARPA timing and these windows kind of are coming together. So I think that's gonna, I actually think these timelines are going to merge and make a lot of sense to do it. Ms. Bergstrom suggests with the master plan and a little insight, prioritize it, whatever, so we have a better sense to inform the decisions. Since I think that timing will end up the same. And with regard to the joint meeting, I think it's not a bad idea, but I appreciate having a discussion here amongst our board at least first. I totally get the point. I appreciate that. Sorry to jump in, Madam Chair.
No, yes, that was part of what I was about to say. I think it's important for our board to have its own chance to have the discussion first. Then we can look into joint meetings. Excuse me. Okay, Mr. Nixon.
Sure. So just a couple of thoughts. So there was a question Ms. Bergstrom was just posing. Maybe it was Ms. Bergstrom. One of you was just posing a question a few minutes ago about what happened. Maybe it was you, Tom. What happens if the system goes down? While we're in the middle of this work, what happens if the existing system fails? So this is actually really one of the questions that Ms. Pryor asked in writing yesterday, and it's one of the and the answer to this question is one that frustrates me. The answer back to Ms. Pryor was, well, if something fails, it's okay because we still have the existing system. There's a disconnect there. I think Ms. Pryor is actually asking, what happens if the existing system fails while we're doing this work? So in other words, you have an existing system, you have an existing 400 amp service panel. We're getting 150 amps into the building from a pole mounted transformer. There's a lot of work that can be done, abatement, new mechanical installation. You can be putting all the new stuff in while you're still using the existing system until the day comes when you're literally switching it over. I think the question from the board or from the board leadership is, well, what's the plan if like the system we have fails? That's a great question. And I believe it was made clear back on January 8th that to mitigate against any potential failure, we would need to look at some sort of smaller scale supplemental heating, particularly for those mystic spaces. And I just don't think that that's happened yet. To be half, so that I'm done being sort of half empty. To be half full, I want to be clear about a couple of things. Weston and Sampson is a highly respected firm. They do a lot of work in town, as I think we all know. I've worked with them myself on projects in my own professional role. I'm impressed actually with the project engineer who put the report together and who engaged with us yesterday. He had very thoughtful answers to our questions. And just as importantly, he was reluctant to give answers to things he just can't know right now. And I respect that a lot too. I think, remember, this is very conceptual, what he's put together. And to Ms. Bergstrom's point, the board can spend ARPA however they wish to. I actually do believe there is value in the board, in management continuing to develop this idea, given how much of it is conceptual, given that the engineer said yesterday he's happy to work with DPW to try to figure out why the spaces that are so cold are so cold. He doesn't know that right now. They've set aside $150,000 to pay for these services. And I think that might be money well spent. So although it sounds like the school committee's not comfortable giving a green light to tear the building apart, I think given the system we have and given how old it is and given all the problems that it has presented DPW, I think it is worthwhile for them to continue down this evaluation path, this design path. They may well, and remember, one of the questions Ms. Pryor asked is, well, what can you do for $500,000? That's a great question, because it may be with a little more time, they may find that they can do all of this for $500,000. Maybe we just don't know yet. So I would actually support them taking this, what is a very conceptual exercise, to, at the very least, like 100% design development. So that they have more knowledge and understanding of the building and can better scope out what's recommended. And having done that, well, if they get to that point with a much clearer understanding of scope, then we'll have a much clearer understanding of who needs to vacate the building and for what, and for how long. So I don't think we should totally put the brakes on this, but I'm okay kind of giving some support to take what is very basically, I wouldn't even call it schematic design. It's an HVAC concept is what it is. I'd be very comfortable showing support to take this through design development with specifically with the request that they spend some time with DPW looking into why those existing rec spaces are so cold in the morning. It's the right team to figure it out, but that literally has not been their charge. I don't think I misstated that, did I, Frank?
No, you didn't.
I think, Chris, the question is, though, the design development of what? The design development of the partial fix that we're talking about? So the sort of lipstick on a pig approach? Or
Yep.
Are we actually taking the whole building into consideration and thinking about really correcting and abating the problem that exists there? And that's why I said I'm not really comfortable with a 3-page summary and questions unanswered, even giving them the green light to go forward on that today. Because not that I'm not at all, just today, because I don't even have enough information in front of me to understand the scope of what we're agreeing to. Because as we know, anytime we move into design and engineering studies, that leads to a project, right? And I don't even know what project we're leading towards right now and why.
Yeah, so I think to answer that, Michelle, to the question is design development of what? There is a fundamental element of this work that has been with us, which is not to rip 1923 steam piping out of the building, which would cost even more money, but to put in some isolation valves, basically deactivate it, so we're relying on that anymore for portions of the building that were built 1923. And then a new electric reliable system, which it is, our systems they're proven, and they will last, you know, I think one of the questions Ms. Pryor asked is, well, how long would this last? And the answer back from Pete Lawson was at least 5 years. I would say actually at least 10 or 12. But this is not a high cost system. It's not a fancy system. It's very simple. They're very trustworthy. They're very reliable. And so to answer your question, design development of what? I think it's a sound goal to find a way so that we're no longer relying on steam piping that's 101 years old, because the rate of failures of this piping is really beginning to go up almost exponentially. And on the one hand, it is DPW's job to make service calls and keep our buildings running. On the other hand, when we're seeing an increase in the number of, pinhole leaks and failures, and of course it's all wrapped in asbestos, I think we're past the canary in the coal mine stage when it comes to this piping. So I think this is a reasonable suggestion because, they're not looking to replace the boiler. The boiler stays. There's actually, the boiler's doing fine. They've even done a lot of work on the boiler about 3 or 4 years ago. The boiler remains to continue to provide heat to the rest of the building. Okay, so the problem is the rest of the building, the 1950 building that relies on the boiler, it does get heat from the boiler, but the rooms are cold. So why? And the engineer doesn't have a good answer for that. He's got a lot of things he's thinking of, but he doesn't have answers. So it's a long way to answer your question. I'm comfortable. I think it would be money well spent to take this concept of basically deactivating 1923 piping, digging more into the building and getting really serious about where we need to put in a VRF system, run that to ground, figure that out. If we can do a pole mounted transformer instead of pad, figure that out, because that's going to affect cost and scope as well. And then while they're doing that work, let that engineer get in there with DPW and see if they can begin to figure out why so many of Nick's spaces are cold in the morning. Because I feel like if we're going to spend money on the building, it needs to address that issue. It is absolutely possible that we could say programming at Mystic should be shifted to Parkhurst and quickly following the construction of Lynch, but maybe not. And you mentioned the prospect of maybe swing space for Morocco. Yeah, until we get through the master plan. So I'm okay supporting a system that's going to be reliable for another 5 or 10 years. I would not be in support of gutting everything, including the heating plant. I mean, that would be a $5, $6, $7 million project, which is actually what I think the board was hearing in March, and that's why they threw the brakes on it, because that's just a scale of expense nobody was expecting, and I didn't think that there was support for it.
Right, and I
Mr.
guess
Hopcroft has his hand up. Mr. Hopcroft has his hand up.
Mr. Hopcroft, can I just follow up on Mr. Nixon, because I don't want to get too far away from what he just said. When we toured the facility, though, in the fall, Mr. Nixon, the messaging from Mr. Lawson was that the boiler was at risk of catastrophic failure. So I guess I'm getting confusing messaging from the select board and DPW about what the risk is. Thanks, Tom.
Sure. So I feel like one of the big elephants in the room here for me is do we have a contingency if heating fails? If it fails in December or later, and if we do have a contingency, or we could throw one together because the system is old and could fail in December, it would be very cold and have no heat in that building. If there's some idea or some way that we would throw something together to solve that, I think that could buy us a little bit more time, which it strikes me that Mr. Nixon came out of this summer or next summer. It strikes me there's a lot of benefits to a next summer, which obviously would have to start planning far before then. But part of it is we'd be a little ways into the master plan. And as Ms. Bergstrom said, maybe we prioritize this building so we have some better insights in that. We also have the Parkhurst space. But it all comes back to, is there a contingency around heat? Because that's what everyone throws up there. Like, oh, what are you going to do if you have 500 kids that can't go to after school? It's going to disrupt all these families and all this stuff. What happens if that happens in December, or January before the short-term solution is put into place? With regard to the moving forward, I get as I try to visualize this, I get that there's this 100-year-old stretch of pipe that has asbestos on it, that develops pinhole leaks, et cetera. And so I get the logic in that. And I think that as we consider what we do, having more information around the different options. One of them, which sounds like a very sound option, is to isolate, put some valves on this section so you can shut it down, but you still have it there if you need to crank it back up. Although I'm pretty confident in the electric solution. So, but anyway. There's the ground mounted or pole mounted transformers, the time frames on those. My gut is that even if we said let's race forward on this, as it's in this direction, that we're not going to get this thing up until a few months before what the time frame that we would do it if we said let's get a little bit more information. So if I'm not clear, I guess I'm okay with moving forward on getting more information on this, having the engineer look at not only this, but look at those other rooms, which sounds like weren't in scope before, but understand why isn't heat getting there? Would heat, if we shut off this whole wing of the building, the original wing, strikes me of a lot less area that steam pressure has to push into. So, are there blockages in pipes or other issues, or would the increased pressure get us there? Those are questions that would be really helpful to know whether that would help. Really, the first question is, maybe we should be focusing on what our plan is if the heat goes out in December, because I just feel like that buys us few more months, and that buys us so much more information and more options for spending for doing this and for our kids. So anyway, long way of saying, Mr. Nixon, maybe there's an opportunity to say yes, let's go to the next phase to gather some more information, and maybe there's a few other categories of information that would be great to gather while you're moving this narrow path forward, and we get information on a few other things like that annex area.
And Mr. Hopcroft, let me just say, if we were to take that approach, it does not actually throw a wrench into the ARPA spending requirement. You have to have ARPA under contract by December of 24, and then it has to be spent by December of 25. So if we were to, let's say, encourage them to take more steps, develop this idea in a little more fulsome way, let the engineers spend some time at DPW, find out specifically why rec spaces are cold, they could start that process, and they could develop a scope of work that could be actually bid and installed in the summer of 25. I mean, you spend the ARPA money well ahead of the December 25. So it seems to me maybe really the issue just comes down to time and whether there is a real or perceived urgency to do something now. I feel that kind of the hurry up offense that we're in brings a lot of risk, and I would be and things that are completely out of our control. Whether you hire the best mechanical engineer or the worst, neither the engineer nor the Winchester School Committee nor the superintendent have any pull to get transformers delivered on site. I mean, it's almost like luck of the draw. And although Eversource really does work hard to try to prioritize school projects, I mean, we got in the queue way early. W say that
We're going to need that. We're going to have.
Mr. Marin,
About and numbers. If we do anything, if we do, we are down about we have to probably consider availability tools, but what our enrollment is. So numbers have, I mean, we're able to figure it out, but the bathroom,
390 more.
I think Andrew, I didn't.
I just add that these are childcare programs, these are licensed programs. Approved. So, yeah. Along with state licensing that adds to it. So.
there's some real challenges that would come along. And then the other item would be, so we had a motion on the table from Mr. Nixon to get, and I'm just going to summarize, for further detail on the design and engineering with an updated cost estimate and further exploration into the causes of the existing Mystic building chronically cold areas.
I would second that, but with a notion that it's really information gathering. We don't. I don't want to slow down a process where we really need to. I'm nervous about going forward on one particular process to completion without having more information. I recognize that moving forward on this would help us gather more information that can help us make that determination. And so I would second it with that in mind.
I agree with Mr. Hopcroft.
This
Provide us with Bergstrom.
I had a question. I heard something at the end there. Move this project forward. But what I heard that I thought to was that we needed more information before we 100%.
Yeah. So I'd like to get more information. Address that areas that Nick has concerns with. So that's one of the pieces of more design. But I think slowing down the process in the event that we end up, moving forward soon. Although I will say, I think part of this, even outside of what they do, is it allows us to have more conversations too, to figure out whether, what this timeline anyway things. So I'm not too hung up or concerned about the 100% drawings on this, but before I'd like to revisit whether we have enough information through this formal process and through side conversations that we feel comfortable that this is the right path forward.
So I guess that's my question and concern, Mr. Hopcroft, is that when we move to 100% design, we're committing to a project. There's no project almost no project that we move forward to 100% design that we aren't then committing to the project. So if this committee is making a motion today that we're comfortable moving towards, with the information we have, 100% design, it's not like we go back and spend another $200,000 on a different engineering and design. Your head, Mr. Nixon, but tell me which projects we don't.
So,
And I would just comment that I did not hear any 100% design.
Me either. Yeah.
Please tell me what.
Well, Mr. Motion, I did not include the last portion of the committee agreeing to 100% design and construction documents on this project. It agreed to having the engineering firm do more and come back with more information and
sorry, but let me just clarify. I did percent construction stages and design element and construction construction documents are 100%. Schematic design can be anything from 10% to 20%. Design is kind of in the middle. Design development concept, and you've methods of construction, you have a sense of the plans and the specs, and you can speak more confidently about the scope, the cost, the timeline, etc. So it is a major milestone in any project. We did it for Lynch. Design development is a stage in a project where you can. It's not. Here's the way to think about design development. It's biddable. It's not buildable, meaning it lacks a lot of details to hand off to a construction cost estimator and get a really good sense of the cost of the project. So that was my motion, was to take this to the next step, which is design development, not construction documents, because that would be 100%. And we don't need to go there.
So I appreciate that. And that was my intent. And if I inadvertently introduced 100% into this conversation, I withdraw those remarks. And I wanted to take it to a point where we had more actionable information, but short of pulling the trigger on it. So it sounds like it's the right place. So thank you, Ms. Bergstrom, for helping clarify that.
So we need a second, although maybe I heard a second sort of a fungible second at some point, but.
I think I seconded it earlier.
Okay, I could not tell. Thank you. And all in favor, we need to have a roll call vote. Mr. Hopcroft?
Aye.
Mr. Nixon?
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom?
Aye.
The chair votes aye, and the vote is unanimous. Thank you very much.
Yeah, would it be appropriate then for what's the best way to find out about is there any way to find out about the failure option or no?
So I think that's the second issue that you were just mentioning, Tom. I mean, it could be a second motion. I mean, I'm not driving anymore. I'm still sitting in a car baking in the heat, but I could maybe wing something. So I just want to remind the committee. So January 8th, DPW said, if we don't have a project underway by the summer of 24, we're going to need to develop some sort of supplemental heating plan, and we will begin working on that and understanding what the costs are. And it was implied that they were talking about those spaces that are chronically cold. So I guess I can envision us throwing some support behind. I mean, maybe the motion is to support, as was stated in January, a supplemental, a small or modest supplemental heating project to make the existing second floor addition recreation department spaces, which are chronically cold in the heating season, more comfortable for the upcoming winter. And we look to DPW to give an update on where that stands. It came from them.
Yeah, so I'd second that. And then that could go away if additional side work on the first motion finds that the first solution is going to solve that. Although I suppose there's still 2/3 of the heating season that I have to deal with.
Yeah, and again, who actually develops it is really not the bailiwick of the school committee. I mean, they could turn around and go to Weston and Sampson and say, okay, while you're looking at the whole big package, in the meantime, what are your recommendations on how we can get some supplemental heat in these spaces this winter? They could do that. And Weston and Sampson would be highly qualified to give them some ideas. Or DPW could go to, their favorite HVAC contractor. I'm not sure I care one way or the other, but I think it needs to happen.
Well, yeah,
Dr. Hackett, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering whether or not the last motion or what's on the table right now it would be better in the form of a request than like a vote of support, because I mean the reality is the select board can do whatever they want to do, right? I mean you'll share the results of this meeting, the prior vote with them and management, and then they've got to figure out what to do with that, and maybe just attaching that part of the discussion was that the committee would like to see or would be interested in getting some information on that or have them explore that. So, because I mean, partly too, they've got to make some decisions about how they move forward with the vote that you took earlier. So, so I think I would think that that would probably be part of the discussion anyway. But I'm just wondering whether it needs to be in the form of an actual motion.
My opinion is, I think if we just express our interest in, we would like to hear some follow-up from that from DPW's statement that they would look into supplemental heating from January 8th meeting. I think that would suffice, short of us making a motion to request them to do so. Mr.
Well, I think
Hopcroft.
I've made the motion only because my understanding, and I would defer to you, Karen, and you, Frank, but my impression from the Zoom call we just had is that although it was represented in January that would happen, I don't think anything has. So it raises the stakes a little bit for me.
Well, Mr. Nixon, I can imagine that might have happened because they were already engaged in this process with the select board to start to investigate the building too. So it may have also fallen to the wayside for them. They only have as much capacity as anybody else in this town does. So I would suggest that I think, if it wants to be in the form of a formal written request that, Mr. Marin and the chair can send to the DPW, I think that formalizes it enough without making it a motion. I think it's a little friendlier and more collaborative. A motion feels like a
School committee telling the DPW what to do.
But yeah, rather than asking them to work with us on it. And I think we're going to need a lot of collaboration around this building.
Mr. Hopcroft.
So I'm comfortable with that as well. I do want to highlight though that when I go back to those initial problems that we're trying to solve, one of them is how do we have the heat for the kids who are up in that upper annex area where we're hearing the complaints that there's not enough heat. And so this request instead of a motion I'm fine with that, addresses that one problem, which is the one that it faces us the most. And then the other things, get into, increasing resilience and DPW and ARPA spending and things like that, which is, appropriately in the other motion. But I do think it's good that we address this actual concern that we are hearing from people and of old kids and teachers. So.
Mr. Nixon, do you, you had made the motion. Do you withdraw the motion?
Yeah, I will. I'll withdraw the motion, but I also would, I guess I want to pile on then to you and to Frank. Short of making an official motion, I think it's also in our interest as in a committee to see some more fulsome responses to the questions Ms. Pryor asked yesterday. I think we started our meeting off talking about that a little bit. I think some of these are really good and fair questions that she asked on behalf of the board. And I feel like the responses were not, they either weren't really answering the question she was asking or they weren't fully answering the question.
We can follow through on that.
Yeah.
I believe if that's what Dr. Hackett is raising his hand on, but
well,
go ahead.
I've come to know Ms. Pryor over the last 3 years, and I would imagine she is pretty good at advocating and making points. And so I think that she'll do that on her own. So if you're interested in the answers to the questions as they stand, that makes a lot of sense to me. But I have no doubt that if she wants them, that she will get them. So.
All right.
I don't want her thinking that
I will only
need our help in So
anything further on this topic? Otherwise, we'll just plow through to the end as expediently as we can. Okay. Anticipated future agenda items. We have our elementary literacy study presentation of findings coming up next Tuesday, June 25th. That is a 9:30 a.m. meeting. We will have, and then we have subcommittee updates and Student Opportunity Act plan coming up. Future meeting dates, June 25th, 9:30 a.m., July 18th, and August 8th. And
But one thing you did not mention, though, Ms. Bolanese, was we're going to have a very high level introduction of capital CapEx.
yes, capital. Yes. I
5 year.
think this is cut and pasted in. So, but yes, you are correct.
Yeah.
And with that, I'd accept a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Bye.
Aye.
I do
Mr.
have
Hopcroft?
I have a question real quick before we all go like away. Who is communicating our votes back? Is it Karen?
I
Are
had
you
spoken with Ms. Pryor that I would touch base with her following this meeting.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you.
And Ms.
Thank
Bolanese, was this meeting recorded in any way in case Ms. Pryor wanted to hear our conversation? Should have asked that at the
I'm
beginning.
just looking.
When Cam was on the meeting,
WinCam is.
Okay, excellent. I
hearing
didn't notice, and I was just curious. We had a pretty thorough discussion. I just wanted to make sure there's a way for Ms. Pryor to hear it if she was interested, or any of the select board members.
Yes, WinCam is still here,
Excellent. Thanks, WinCam.
always. And the chair votes aye. So vote is unanimous and we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.